So, you want to buy a container ship, load it up with thousands of boxes, sail it across the ocean, collect your fee. It sounds about as exciting as it looks. A massive floating shelf, quietly doing its job. Here's what almost nobody realizes about this business. For most of its existence, container shipping was one of the least profitable industries on Earth. Thin margins, brutal competition, decades of barely breaking even. And then, in a single year, it became one of the most profitable businesses in the history of global commerce. In 2021 alone, the global container shipping industry made an operating profit of around $110 billion, nearly 3 times more than the entire industry had earned over the previous decade combined. Same ships, same routes, same ocean, 3 times a decade of profit in 12 months. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how that happened, why the industry doesn't actually make money by moving more cargo, what a single ship stuck sideways in a canal did to the entire world economy, and the one thing that explains why container shipping will probably never be a stable business, no matter how many ships get built. There's also one piece to this story that most people completely miss, and I'll get to that at the end, because it reframes everything that came before it. Let's start with the number that breaks people's brains. Maersk is the name in container shipping. In 2021, the company reported an EBIT of just under $18 billion for its core ocean freight business, compared to $3.2 billion the year before. Revenue was up 55%, EBITDA tripled to $24 billion, and free cash flow hit $16.5 billion in a single year. And then, the year after that, Maersk posted EBIT of $30.9 billion for 2022, the firm's best-ever annual result, on revenues of $81.5 billion. For context on how insane that is, Maersk's 2021 profit was expected to meet or exceed the combined profits from the previous 9 years. 1 year, 9 years of profit. And then the year after that was even bigger. Now, here's the part that makes this interesting, because the obvious assumption is that they must have been moving way more cargo. More ships, more routes, more containers. That's how you make more money, right? Drury's analysis confirmed that the elevated profits were the result of higher freight rates, not higher volumes or additional services. Neither Maersk nor Hapag-Lloyd carried more containers in their record quarter than they had in the same quarter of the previous year. The volume was actually flat, or in some quarters, slightly down. What changed was the price per box. Where Maersk was making around $95 in operating profit per container transported in 2020, that figure grew more than 5-fold in 2021, reaching around 530 SAGs per TEU. Zim, one of their competitors, saw an even wilder jump, from about $114 per container in 2020 to over $1,256 in 2021. Exact same ships, exact same boxes, exact same ocean, just a completely different price tag on each one. So what flipped the switch? The short answer is chaos. And to understand the chaos, you need to understand one ship. On March 23, 2021, a 400-meter-long container vessel called the Ever Given was sailing through the Suez Canal when it lost maneuverability in a sandstorm and high winds. The 400-meter giant lodged horizontally in a 265-meter-wide stretch of the canal, and the efforts to dislodge and refloat it were unprecedented, involving dredging, towing, and lightering. One ship, sideways, in the most important shipping lane on Earth. About 12% of all global trade passes through the Suez Canal each day. The blockage disrupted the path of more than $9 billion worth of goods per day. Supply chain experts at the University of Toledo and LMA Consulting Group put the economic cost at around $416 million per hour. More than 430 ships were forced to wait on both sides of the canal. Every hour the Ever Given sat there, the queue got longer, the delays got worse, and the ripple effect spread further into supply chains that were already under enormous stress from the pandemic. It took the deployment of large dredgers and backhoe cranes, removing more than 30,000 cubic meters of sand from around the ship's bow, plus 11 harbor tugs and 2 powerful seagoing tugs to finally free the vessel. 6 days and 7 hours after after it ran aground, the canal reopened, but the story wasn't over. Here's the part that barely made the news. Egypt seized the Ever Given and refused to let it leave. The ship sat anchored in the Great Bitter Lake, a stretch of water inside the canal, for 106 days, while the Egyptian government and the ship's owner negotiated compensation. The initial demand was $900 million. On board, more than 18,000 containers, full of cargo that companies around the world were desperately waiting for. A ship worth hundreds of millions of dollars, held hostage as collateral. The owner eventually settled, the ship was released, and the world moved on. But the disruption it caused didn't disappear with it. And this is where the real story of the profit explosion comes in, because the Ever Given was a symptom, not the cause. The cause was something much simpler and much harder to fix. Ports couldn't keep up. When COVID hit, consumer behavior shifted fast. People stopped spending money on experiences and started buying things: furniture, electronics, gym equipment, home goods. And all of those things had to be shipped. As households shifted their discretionary spending from experiences to goods, the rate to ship a 40-foot container rose to as much as $20,000 in some cases. Before the pandemic, the average rate for a 40-foot container was around $1,450. By September 2021, that same box cost $10,377 to ship. Ports got congested. Ships sat waiting offshore for weeks to unload. Containers piled up in the wrong places. And because shipping is a circular system, you need the empty boxes back to fill them again. When the empties got stranded, capacity disappeared even faster. The carriers hadn't added more ships. They hadn't built new ports. They'd done nothing differently. The world just needed more stuff moved than the system could handle. And when that happens in this industry, the people who own the ships get to name their price. The blockbuster results came despite an overall decline in volumes compared to the prior year, and analysts noted they were likely to drive fundamental change in future carrier behavior. The industry wasn't earning more because it was doing more. It was earning more because it had leverage, and that is the core of how container shipping actually works. If you've watched our video on oil tankers, this will feel familiar. The money isn't in the cargo. The money is in the rate. And the rate is set by scarcity, not by service. Now, here's the thing I told you I'd get back to. The part that reframes everything. Because if you heard those profit numbers and thought, I want in on that, you need to know what happened next. In releasing its Q3 2022 results, Maersk warned of dark clouds on the horizon. As congestion eased and declining consumer demand led to significant destocking, the expected normalization of the ocean market kicked in. For 2023, Maersk guided for underlying EBITDA of just $8 to $11 billion and EBIT of $2 to $5 billion, down from a $30.9 billion EBIT peak just 1 year earlier. The profit that had taken a decade to accumulate, then tripled in a single year, then doubled again, evaporated almost as fast as it had appeared. This is a sector that had barely reached break-even in the 5 years before the pandemic. Then it had the greatest 2-year run in the history of global shipping. Then it was back to fighting for margin again. That's not a bad year followed by a good year. That's the entire business model. And this is the thing that makes container shipping unlike almost any other industry you can study. The cycle isn't a flaw in the system. The cycle is the system. In normal times, too many ships chase too little cargo, rates collapse, and carriers lose money or barely survive. Then something breaks: a pandemic, a war, a canal blockage, a port strike, and suddenly there's not enough capacity for all the cargo. Rates explode, and the carriers print money for as long as the chaos lasts. Then new ships get ordered, capacity comes back, chaos resolves, and the whole thing resets. The Ever Given, at around 20,000 TEU capacity, is almost as large as the largest container ships currently in service, which can carry up to 24,000 TEU. To put that in physical terms, if you lined up the containers from one of those mega ships end to end, they'd stretch roughly 140 kilometers. That's the scale of what moves every time one of these ships crosses an ocean. And yet the margin on each of those containers in a normal year can be razor thin or negative. Be honest. When you think about the global economy moving goods from one continent to another, you probably imagine a well-oiled machine. Reliable, consistent, predictable. What you've just seen is the opposite. This is an industry that swings between near bankruptcy and record-breaking profit based almost entirely on factors nobody inside it controls. A virus? A sandstorm? A ship that went sideways? That's why the comment section on this one is always interesting. Drop your take down there. Do you think the big carriers will ever find a way to smooth out the cycle? Or is the chaos actually baked in permanently? I read more of those than you'd think. And if this video clicked for you, there are 2 more in this maritime series worth watching back to back. The oil tanker video covers the same rate versus cargo dynamic, just with crude oil and even wilder price swings. And the cruise ship video looks at what happens when you take a vessel this size and try to turn it into a floating resort. The economics are completely different and somehow even stranger. Both are queued up for you. The cycle continues.